So to both of our listeners, I say welcome, and to introduce the premise of this show, in search for a more meaningful life beyond my role as head of school at ISB, and having had a couple of conversations with new colleagues about music, and then having a first bash at a podcast with Jake and Breen, I decided to host in a rather amateur way a radio show in which the guest chooses 4 songs that are dear to them, one piece of literature, one book, and a luxury item, the premise being that they're about to be cast away on a desert island, and these are the songs and book, and the luxury item that will sustain them for the foreseeable future, because I would imagine that rescue is impossible and a lonely death on the desert island is inevitable. And this premise is stolen unashamedly from a long-standing UK radio show called Desert Island Discs, in which the guest is asked to choose 8 songs. We're going to bring it down to 4 for the sake of time and for trying to ensure that not everyone falls asleep during the podcast, to sustain interest. And the first guest, and thank you for being the canary in the coal mine. Well, there's not much at risk, really, is there? There's not much at risk. My first guest is the inestimable Breen O'Reilly, film teacher extraordinaire, Renaissance man, I would say. And so, Breen, welcome.
Yeah, nice to be here. Nice to do this.
You're very welcome. I'm excited by bearing in mind the other conversations we've had about music, about which you seem to have an encyclopedic knowledge. So, Breen, tell us all a little bit about where you're from, please.
I'm from the west coast of Ireland and grew up in what we thought was a big town, but it really was kind of a small town. We had 5,000 people, and we were the capital of our area.
What's the name of the town?
Castlebar.
Right.
So it was a place where soccer and football were the 2 most important things.
Soccer and
for
football?
Me. Oh, soccer and music.
Right.
Yeah, soccer. Well, the old thing about, do you call it soccer or football? Americans call it soccer, and then some British people say, well, you shouldn't call it soccer, but we called it soccer because football meant Gaelic football.
Gaelic football, indeed, yeah.
Which was by far more popular.
And remains so in many parts of Ireland.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And so to the uneducated, and by that I mean me, many people's impressions of an upbringing in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, is influenced by Angela's Ashes. And the sense that it was great community but great poverty. And to what extent, if at all, has that any resonance, not necessarily to your own upbringing, but to what you grew up in and around at that time?
We never thought of it as a place that was poor, because there was nobody rich, but there was nobody either at the other end of the scale where we lived. And when I saw Angela's Ashes, it's not a world that I ever experienced. It's not a book I liked.
Thank God for that.
He's not a writer that I like either. I think he.
Well, you can say that now because he's dead, right?
Well, yeah. I think he exploited a stereotype and just ran with it and got very rich.
For which people like me fell, obviously.
Yeah.
The stereotype. Yeah, good. Imagine that, he died a rich teacher, right?
I bet he did. Yeah.
Good. And so,
actually, if you want a funny story, my brother-in-law was at a launch at some kind of an Irish community fundraising thing in New York, and ended up sitting beside Frank McCourt's brother, who had written Angela's Ashes. And Frank McCourt was speaking to the guests at that night, and during the speech, Frank McCourt's brother said to my brother-in-law, said, I think I should have a go at this thing too, there's a lot of money to be made. And he did. He both had a go, and he made a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, it's not too late, right?
No.
Being a teacher from Ireland, there's a rich vein of prior experience for you to follow. And so in this childhood in the west coast of Ireland, tell us when you first got enthused by music and or by literature. What were your earliest memories of music and literature playing a role in your life?
In terms of music in Ireland, we didn't get BBC. It was hard to get British radio stations. We could get Radio 2, I think, which introduced us to things like The Laughing Policeman and English Country Garden, which seemed to be played all the time, at the same time, every Saturday morning. And Irish radio at that stage was very nationalistic, and it promoted Irish traditional music and Irish country and western, which I abhorred. And although it was a favourite music in our town, of course, and so it was hard to contact music that was like, for example, jazz was happening around the world, but not in our town, not in our country, really. And when I went to try and pick the songs that kind of represented that era, I picked a song that it's the same age as me. The song came out in the year I was born, but I didn't know this version until years and years later. I didn't know it was a song called "Singing the Blues." I didn't know it was a song about blues, as in blues as a musical style. I knew it because it's the song that my dad sang all the time, and he either sang it or he whistled it. And we didn't live on the ground floor. We lived one floor up, and that's where our house began. So he would come up the stairs, and I would hear him coming. He would either sing or whistle this song, and so the version I know is the version he sang, not the famous version. And when I went to find this version, I was surprised to realize that there's so much whistling on it. I didn't know there was until this week.
Well, it's interesting. You talk about those childhood memories, because you just invoked a huge wave of nostalgia in me, whether you meant to or not, by mentioning English Country Garden, which is a song I can't stand and never.
Yeah.
I hope never to listen to again. But it was one that was on in my house frequently, and my mother used to sing it. Unfortunately, far too often, but I could feel it. I was transported back there when you mentioned it, and of course,
it was a list of flowers, hollyhocks, and
well, that's
the only word I remember.
Let's not revive it now. You sing it now, and I'll walk out. So you mentioned Singing the Blues, and I'm familiar with that song from what we would refer to as the more famous versions of it, and obviously you just mentioned it invokes some childhood memories for you and memories of your father as well. So let's have a listen to that version now that you found latterly by Guy Mitchell.
Well, I never felt more like singing the blues, 'cause I never thought that I'd ever lose your love, dear. Why'd you do me this way? Well, I never felt more like crying all night, 'cause everything's wrong and nothing ain't right without you. You got me singing the blues. The moon and stars no longer shine. The dream is gone, I thought was mine. There's nothing left for me to do but cry over you. But, well, I never felt more like running away. But why should I go? 'Cause I couldn't stay without you. You got me singing the blues. Well, I never felt more like singing the blues, 'cause I never thought that I'd ever lose your love, dear. Why'd you do me this way? Well, I never felt more like crying all night, 'cause everything's wrong and nothing ain't right without you. You got me singing the blues. Oh, the moon and stars no longer shine. The dream is gone, I thought was mine. There's nothing left for me to do but cry over you. But, well, I never felt more like running away. But why should I go? 'Cause I couldn't stay without you. You got me singing the blues.
I found strange about being connected to the song that my dad sang is that I don't recall him ever listening to the radio, listening to music on the radio. He listened to the news and he listened to sports, and it was my mother that was interested in music. Yet he's the one that has this song that connects me.
So when did your interest in music become more noticeable in your life, rather than just as a response to the immediate surroundings, your mum, your dad, your friends, for example?
Yeah, when I've listened to other versions of Desert Island Disc, there's often a pattern where somebody talks about how they discovered music first through their parents' record collection, or and we didn't have a record collection, we didn't have a record player, and Desert Island Disc often asked, so what's the first record you ever bought? But the first record I got, I didn't buy it, I won it in a drawing competition to draw a scene from the Jungle Book, Walt Disney's Jungle Book. So, and the prize was...
This has already been worth it.
The prize was a gatefold vinyl with a book that flipped over with all the pictures and the lyrics. And so we owned our first record, but we didn't have a record player. So in celebration, we bought the record player. So that was my introduction to music.
I mean, I have to ask, what was the scene from the Jungle Book? Do you remember? You probably
I don't remember what it was.
Really?
No.
Well, at least make one up. No, I'm just Now, what about any involvement with playing music? Obviously, you play music now to, as what I heard, to a pretty good level. So when did that first come?
Not really. I just assumed that I couldn't play. I assumed it was just too difficult, and I bought a guitar after I finished what you'd call high school. I went to London for the summer and got a job working in a hotel, and the first pay packet I got, I went down and I bought an acoustic guitar, which I still have, the same one.
So far, that's a story right out of the back pages of a true rock star, right? The first pay packet, you went out and bought a guitar.
And that's where the rock star life ended.
Well, I'm not sure.
On page 1.
I'm not sure. Do you remember what type of guitar it was?
Yeah, it was a Saxon guitar. And I only know that because I have a song where I include the line about my first pay packet on a Saxon guitar.
That's great.
Yeah.
Excellent. So that stint in the hotel was after high school?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And what did you do next with your life after working in a hotel and buying a guitar?
I went to teachers college, where myself and my friend had this brief idea that we might become rock stars, but we had no talent really. We just had.
It hasn't stopped many.
I know, but we needed more than that. We also teamed up with two guys who had huge confidence and even less talent, and we just did a couple of cover versions at one or two shows. It never went anywhere.
Where was this now? Is this back in Ireland?
This is in Dublin. Yeah.
In Dublin,
yeah.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
So you'd moved to the city.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And for me, the move to the city was it was the bright lights from. It was suddenly you had access to all this music.
Yeah.
You got radio stations that were easy to pick up. You could go to shows, like real shows. I went to see bands that really I loved, like Dr. Feelgood.
I was going to ask you who your first concert was. Do you remember who your first concert was?
The first concert that I actually, I think it was Dr. Feelgood. I'd seen a couple of kind of minor bands play in my own local hometown, but that wasn't. This was.
So what year was
a
this?
Real band. This was like 76,
right.
75, 76. Maybe.
It's an exciting time to be discovering the music scene in Ireland or the UK. That's for sure.
Yeah, that was. I remember a friend of mine owned a record shop in Dublin, and he had this Polish guy who used to come in every Saturday to buy records, and this guy was obsessed with one question. He would always ask people. He said, "What's the greatest, most creative decade for music ever?" And so he would always start this conversation in the shop. And so it depends. If you take that a decade always starts like the 70s, well, but also you could say a decade is a selection of 10 years.
Yeah.
But his claim was that it was the 70s. He said that was the place where music began to get more creative. It just took off.
But you still had the tail end of the Beatles, and
which
is a nice way to sort of begin the 70s with the end of something as huge as that.
Yeah, I think more. It's hard to say, but so much originality came in the 70s that we never had before.
Was it you I was talking to recently who said you weren't a fan of the Beatles? Was that?
No.
Or was that another member there was another colleague, I think.
Yeah. I don't know how you could not.
I think he or she's been dismissed, so it's okay. We can move on from that conversation. Yeah. What a terrible thought. So the time period really which gave birth to David Bowie as well, because it was 60s, when he first started dipping his toes in, I think. But the 70s is when he really made a name for himself, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
And as you were exploring that part of the music scene over in Dublin, I was born in 68, and I was born in a town called Sidcup, which is about 3 miles away from where David Bowie lived.
Yeah.
And that was a small part of the world that gave a lot of influence on the music scene over the years. David Bowie was there, John Paul Jones was born in that part of the world, Mick and Keith were born in Dartford.
Right.
Or raised in Dartford, just down the road, and then Susie and the Banshees
Right, yeah.
from that part of the world. So then, of course, that leads us on to your next song. And when you sent this list to me the other day in preparation for this evening, it sparked another wave of nostalgia, because David Bowie is my brother's favourite artist.
Right.
And I would say that if my brother had been given this task, he would have chosen the same song as you.
Really?
Which spoke to me quite profoundly to see that on your list, because I remember him still like it was yesterday, singing along to David Bowie songs and trying to persuade me that that's where it's at. And of course, I didn't think it was, because I didn't want to agree with my brother, because he was older than me. But latterly, of course, like millions, I turned towards Bowie rather than against him. So tell us about this song, and tell us about how you first got exposed, as it were, to the work of someone who was born across the sea from you.
Yeah, so I think Bowie is a huge influence on who I am, because of he was so different. He came along, he did something that was completely different. He followed his own drum. He broke every kind of expectation, and but I still love him number one for the music. For me, the music came first, and every other influence of him is connected to that. There were maybe 2 or 3 Bowie fans in my town, and then we gradually grew to a few more. It was not the kind of
Safety
music.
in numbers, right?
Yeah,
If
it wasn't
only
the
2 or
kind
3
of
that
thing
we
that
run
was
out.
listened to. And like you said with your brother, you didn't want to admit liking Bowie. Myself and my brother, we had the wall in our bedroom we had a line, and on one side it was only Bowie posters and Everton posters for me, and the other side was only Man United and T-Rex.
Oh, well.
And even though I liked a lot of T-Rex songs, I couldn't admit to liking them until years later.
Yeah, well, Manchester United, anything, anywhere, is abhorrent to me. My son's a Manchester United supporter. I've never forgiven him. But, I mean, T-Rex and Bowie, there was a significant amount in common there.
Yeah,
They recorded together, at least.
They did, yeah, 1 or 2 things.
Yeah, good. So tell us about the song in particular that you've chosen.
Yeah, so when I tried to pick the songs, well, first of all, I had to eliminate a whole bunch of artists that were just like Elvis Costello and Springsteen and R.E.M. and Tom Waits and David Sylvian and so many people that I love that...
David Sylvian, goodness me.
Yeah, and
that's a name from the past.
I couldn't... I said, okay, I just have to deal with those and pick these songs. And for Bowie, I thought, it's probably not my favourite Bowie song, but I remember when this album came out, this album Low, the highlight of every week for me was on Thursday. My dad was a newsagent, so on Thursday night the bus would come in.
I think I know what's coming.
And I would go and I would pick up the parcel of magazines that would come for delivery, and rather than wait for them to go on sale on the Friday morning, if I went to the bus stop, I could pick them up and bring them there to my uncle's shop, and he'd open it and I'd get my copy of New Musical Express. And I remember when Low came out, and where I lived, you'd read about the album before you'd get a copy of it, because you'd have to wait a few weeks. It's not like there's no instant downloads. Things took a while to get to the west of Ireland. So I read the review of Low. What I remember is that Charles Shaar Murray did the review, and Julie Burchill also did a review. So they gave 2 reviews of the same album, because she said it was complete junk, and he said work of genius. And I don't remember the magazine ever doing that before. And then I thought that this song, it's so audacious to think of making a song that's like 180 seconds long, but half of it is instrumental. You assume it's an instrumental, and suddenly it comes in, and it breaks every rule of how to construct a song, but it also says something about him, the 2 things that he was so innovative in sound and in vision.
Okay, let's have a listen to that. Well, you've taken me back again to my brother's bedroom, and it's quite nostalgic, Breen. So what I noticed though at that time, bearing in mind your where you grew up, and the first two songs at least, one influenced by your father, and the second one influenced just by some of your presence in Dublin and being exposed to the new music scene, is that you grew up at a time of great political upheaval and social upheaval, and so far nothing's in terms of your choice has been influenced by that. But what were some of your memories and most first-hand experiences of that, and sentiments, I suppose, as a young man at a time being challenged by everything that you sort of felt and saw around you?
Yeah, well, in terms of music, the what we call the Troubles in Northern Ireland, the biggest effect it had on us is that most bands wouldn't come to Ireland. They felt that it was not a safe place to be. But we experienced like nothing. If you look on the map, Ireland seems like a really small place, and Belfast and Dublin are 2 hours apart. But in Ireland, 2 hours is half a country almost. So we were not really touched by what happened in Northern Ireland, except when there was a bombing in Dublin, but I didn't live in Dublin at that time. So in a way, we kind of felt a bit removed from it, and it was also, there was a strange thing that even if you watch the radio and the TV, the Irish government, in an effort to sort of silence any opinion of the IRA or terrorist organizations, that their voices could not be heard on TV. So there would be interviews with these people, but their voice would be dubbed in by someone else. It was kind of surreal.
By Prince Charles or something like that.
Not quite. He wasn't available that day.
He wasn't on the list of standards.
But you had the bizarre. I do remember. I don't know what year this might have been, but there was this political leader, Jerry Adams, that we had seen for years and years speaking on TV, and nobody knew what he sounded like. And then we finally heard his voice, and it was kind of surreal.
But I mean, in Dublin, I imagine you came into in pubs and clubs, etc. Some of these music venues. Did you come across any of the fundraising or the rhetoric or the campaigning? And
no, the strange thing is that the only time I came across that was in New York.
Yeah.
Years later, we went to an Irish bar that had a band playing called Black 47. The name is based on it's the year of where the Irish famine started, 1847, and Black 47 was the worst year in that famine. And so the lead singer was from the town next to my wife, and we talked to him. We had all these connections, and they were kind of like the Clash meets the Pogues kind of band. But then they sang one song where the lyrics were in Irish and in Irish language, and it was Chucky Our Law, which translates as Our Day Will Come, which was the motto of the IRA. And then this box was handed around for donations, and I'd heard about this happening, and I'd never experienced it. It was quite a strange place to be at that time.
I think it's probably likely that living and growing up in southeast London, as I referenced before, I was hearing more about the Troubles than maybe you were.
I think so.
And going into London, seeing more manifestations of the problems themselves. You know, the bombing. At least 2 bombings I remember influencing people with whom I went to school. So there's a good chance, even I'm just a little bit younger than you, maybe, that this was happening more with me than it was for you. Let's move on. And your next song, there's a line, isn't there? There's at least one I can see. I've never heard of this song, but obviously the artists David Byrne and Brian Eno. There's a connection with Brian Eno to David Bowie, and then latterly, of course, back to Irish culture. As we'll maybe talk about later on. But David Byrne of the Talking Heads, tell us about your finding this song or these.
Well, I picked David Byrne because I think he is like. I know David Bowie is revered, but I think David Byrne is the Renaissance man. Really, he's a writer. He introduces world music. He's an artist. He creates some really interesting work. He mixes dance with his music. He switches genres all the time. And I think this album, I absolutely love what they did in this album. This is, I think, one of the most important albums ever made. Although, to discover it now, you may not think that, but these were 2 guys who decided that they would combine all sort of things that were never combined before. African rhythms, New York funk, disco sounds, and they put it all together with what they called found sounds, just snatches of things they recorded off radios, and it was all done on tape. It was like physical tape that was cut and stuck together, nothing digital. This kind of album is easy to make today, but these guys did it with glue and scissors, basically. And for this song, what they found a recording of an actual exorcism, where this guy is calling out the Jezebel spirit out of somebody, and the Jezebel spirit is supposed to be this spirit that enters females and makes them do things that are not acceptable to the society they live in. And I thought, just what a great mix. I know it's been copied so much now. It's like, if you want something weird, let's put an exorcism in there. But these guys did it first.
Yeah, where'd you go looking for a recording of an exorcism?
I don't know.
Download
Exorcism.com.
iTunes, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's listen to the Jezebel Spirit, David Byrne and Brian Eno.
Are you ready, Jimmy Delivery? Put your hand up in the air. This is from the pit of hell. Okay, sister, you have a Jezebel spirit within you. You have a spirit of greed. You have a spirit of destruction.
I always got a feeling that the only thing that stopped David Byrne from becoming more wildly commercially successful was shyness, maybe integrity, and the fact that he was probably a little bit or a lot of bit bonkers.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's fair.
No, I think it is. Yeah.
I mean, the fact that you sort of mentioned him in the same vein as a David Bowie, I could definitely see.
Yeah.
But there was something. I always felt the lift didn't go all the way up to the top. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is not a criticism. It's true of many of us. So where were you geographically and in terms of your life at that stage now? Because we jumped from Dublin and Teachers College to
Jezebel. I was teaching in Ireland. I was teaching elementary school there.
Right. What kind of school? How big? Whereabouts?
It was in a suburb of Dublin. It was a tough place. It was a rough neighbourhood where I wasn't allowed to teach. They didn't want me to teach grade 5 or 6 because that was too tough. I could teach grades 2, 3, 4. That was kind of manageable, but there was only a couple of teachers that were tough enough to teach that.
Right, because you're a rookie.
No, not even as even after 10 years.
So what sorts of things were you seeing in the school?
Well, it was. The government had decided that they were going to try and rehouse people from the kind of ghetto areas, and what they did was they moved them to this new area, but they put all the same people together, so the problem was just in a new location.
Yeah.
So most of the kids that I taught had older brothers in prison or involved in drugs.
Yeah.
One of my past pupils appeared on the rooftop of a prison in Dublin, leading the riot.
Really?
Yeah.
That must have been a great lesson. Was he absent for a couple of days and missed some of your
The funny thing about
some of
him,
your genius, or
his claim to fame, he would come into class in, I think this was 3rd grade, and he would come in and he'd tell me, I've learned a new Elvis song. So his family were Elvis Presley fans, and Elvis Presley was not part of their lives, but it was all over by then. But he would come in and he'd offer to sing it, and I'd say, okay. So he'd get up on the table and he'd get into his Elvis Presley mode. And
which is getting on the table is good practice for being on the roof of the
It
prison,
is,
right?
yeah, I can see the
Balance and
transition.
stability.
Yeah. And he'd curl his lip like Elvis, and he'd sing. He came in one day, he was going to do Mystery Train. And so he moved on from there.
Excellent.
He could have been a singer. I don't know what went wrong.
Which year was this? What period?
This was mid-80s.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when did you start your journey overseas and teaching internationally?
1990.
Right.
We spent a long weekend in my hometown where it rained non-stop all the time, and we thought, we need to go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So we looked for a job, and we found a job in Bahrain, and
Right.
we didn't quite know where that place was.
Yeah.
We found an atlas and looked at it, and we said, well, let's go for a year, let's see what it's like.
You looked at the rainfall readings and
Yeah.
saw it
yeah.
was slightly different from Ireland. Yeah.
Yeah, so we packed up. We were allowed, at that time in Ireland, you could take 1 year leave of absence and come back and have your guaranteed job.
Nice.
So we thought, this is great. If we don't like it, we'll come home.
Don't go getting any ideas, by the way.
Yeah. So it didn't quite go to plan, because just as we were about to leave, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and people started
Timing.
leaving that region, and we were going in.
Mm.
And my son Dave, he would have to carry a gas mask around with him, because
How old was he at that time?
he was three and a half, and so there was a risk of poison gas attack. But we had a great time that year, and then we extended our leave for 1 more year, and then for 1 more, and eventually we had to say, okay, we like living overseas.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
And where did you go next after Bahrain?
We went to Malaysia. We went to Kuala Lumpur. Loved it there.
There for some time, right?
4 years there.
4 years, only. Okay. And then here.
And then here since 2001.
Right, great, excellent. So let's move on to your fourth choice, and this is probably the only one for which, for me, there's absolutely no connection whatsoever. Even though I didn't know the David Byrne song, I'd have heard of him.
Right.
But I don't know much about Guy Clark, so why don't you talk
So
about,
this is
talk about this
it's
and
got
why?
It's got a little web of connections. I thought I wanted to put in a song that's kind of a perfect song in terms of craft, because for me, song lyrics are really important. I have some friends who just, they say, I don't listen to lyrics at all, and I kind of find that hard to think about. I think all the people I love most, their lyrics are really important. And although Guy Clark would not make my top 50 favorite people, I think he's got 2 or 3 songs that are amazing. And when we started working first, myself and Mary, we used to go to gigs in Dublin, and we used to go to this guy called Freddie White. He was a singer from Cork, and a great voice, and he would do cover versions of Tom Waits and Hoagie Carmichael and a really wide range of people, maybe Randy Newman. And he used to sing this song called Desperados, Waiting for a Train, which I'd never heard before. I didn't know who wrote it. And only later discovered that it was this guy, Guy Clark, who is really highly respected songwriter. And what I love about the song is that it's a story. And it's a song that he wrote for somebody that he really loved. It's this old man that was a friend of his mother's, and he used to, of his grandmother's, and he used to meet this guy as a child, and was really great friends with this older man. And then as the years go by, he notices that the old man has aged unexpectedly. He didn't think he would ever grow old, and he's got this great line where he said, you can imagine him putting his hands and running it through his hair, and he said, runs his hand through 70 years of living. And he then talks about then one day he goes back and then the guy is gone. And so it's a great song written for somebody that he's really close to. And it was only years later that he found out that this man was actually his grandmother's secret lover.
Wow.
But he didn't know that when he wrote the song. And
Wow.
and what I love too about this song is that in the opening, it talks. The opening line is when I hear the Red River Valley. So he's talking about a song, the Red River Valley. But when he says those three words, he uses the same notes as that actual song. And so I like the idea of pulling things from different places and putting them together.
Well, let's listen to Desperados Waiting for a Train by Guy Clark.
And I'd play the Red River Valley, and he'd sit in the kitchen and cry, and run his fingers through 70 years of living, and wonder, Lord, has ever well I drill gone dry. His friends, me and this old man, was like desperados waiting for a train, like desperados waiting for a train. Well, he's a drifter and a driller, boy wells, and an old school man of the world. He taught me how to drive his car when he's too drunk to, and he'd wink and give me money for the girls. And our lives was like some old western movie, like desperados waiting for a train, like desperados waiting for a train. And from the time that I could walk, he'd take me with him to a bar called the Green Frog Cafe. And there was old men with beer guts and dominoes, lying about their lives while they played. And I was just a kid that they all called him sidekick, was like desperados waiting for a train, like desperados waiting for a train. And one day I looked up and he's pushing 80, and there's brown tobacco stains all down his chin. Well, to me, he's one of the heroes of this country. So why is he all dressed up like them old men, drinking beer and playing Moon and 42, just like a desperado waiting for a train, like a desperado waiting for a train. And in a day before he died, I went to see him. And I was grown, and he was almost gone. So we just closed our eyes and dreamed us up a kitchen, and sang another verse of that old song. Come on, Jack, that son of a bitch is coming. And we're desperados waiting for a train, like desperados waiting for a train.
what I noticed when I look at the choices of music, what surprised me most, Breen, was that there's ostensibly nothing by anyone who's overtly Irish, either who migrated into that culture or who were born and raised there. So is there any significance in that? I mean, for an Irishman not to have something by U2, the Waterboys, the Pogues, or even a transplanted Irishman like an Elvis Costello, for example, it just comes as a surprise. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't love Irish music for the sake of that it's Irish. I love music that's really good, and there's some great Irish music. I mean, U2 in their good period, they can be great. They can be a bit dodgy too on record, but in concert they're really great. I don't know. I don't really have I mean, there's a couple of Irish bands that I really like that never really made it. Radiators from Space and the Blades, but they're again from that period of late 70s, mid 80s when music was really exploding, and I think at that time the best music in the world was coming out of England. There was bands formed every few minutes, and Dublin did the same for a period. There was a lot of bands that had one or two great songs and they sort of fizzled, but it was a great time. But the big names, they wouldn't make my top 20.
So one of the choices you had to make prior to this show was your favourite book, your favourite piece of literature. And so having looked at and listened to the 4 songs, tell us about your choice of reading for the Desert Island, please, Breen.
So I was kind of confused about how to do this. So I thought, my first thought was, there's a book called Winter's Bone, which was later made into a film too. And I thought maybe I'll pick that because that's the only book that I ever had the experience that when I came to the last page, I flipped back to the first page and read it straight through again. The story's good, but it's not the story, it's the way it's written. But I thought, if you're sitting on a desert island, I read it twice, how many times more am I going to read it? And then I thought, okay, so the book that really changed my interest in literature was 100 Years of Solitude. And I thought I could read that a bunch of times. But I thought, yeah, that's limited too. But I thought, what about T.S. Eliot? And I thought, I don't read that much poetry, but I love what he does. I think it's been written for a long time ago, and much of it is relevant today. He's got a poem called The Hollow Men, people with heads stuffed with straw. I think I wonder what he's writing about.
I've only just met you.
Yeah. But I think what I love about it is it's so complex. You can delve into it, but every time you go in, you find something different, and you could read it over and over and over and discover something. And maybe the favorite poem is in the 4 quartets. I can't admit to even understanding half of what's in there, but the bits I understand or half understand, I love. Like time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. Oh, well, that's going to keep me going for a day.
Well, you'll have time on that island,
yeah.
Won't you, alone, to wrestle with the other 50% of the poem that you don't understand. Talk about time past and present. You'll have plenty of that. Thank you very much for that. And of course, the other thing that you're asked to choose before this is your luxury item. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about the luxury item that you'll take with you, cast away.
Yeah, I take a guitar with the assumption that the strings never break.
Right. We can arrange that.
Yeah, so you can sit on the beach. I guess you get fed up with the beach and could write some songs. And so I remember when you said early on, you said, did you ever about playing music and being in bands? And I did get into bands. We were always doing cover versions, and I had a band here in Beijing with a good friend from Chicago, Mike from the Chicago Tribune, and we put this band together and we played all the songs we loved, because I went to his house one night and discovered he had the same CD collection as me, and we said, why don't we write some songs? And we kind of came to the conclusion that we were both around 50 at the time, and we're saying, if we've gone 50 years without writing a song, that means we can't do it. We would have done it long before now. And then he wrote a song. And I thought, well, if he can do it, I'm going to have a go too.
Yeah.
So Mike Lebb was my inspiration. And the other one was a guy called Johnny Dowd. He's kind of a alt country psychedelic. I don't know. He doesn't really fit a category. But I read about him that he was a truck driver until he was 50 and decided he was going to give up truck driving and become a singer-songwriter, and he did. I thought, well, have a go too. So,
good for you.
So I could sit on the beach and play music.
What kind of guitar would you choose? Acoustic?
Well, do I get an amp also? What am I going to plug
I
it
could
into?
throw one in.
Right.
A special deal.
Yeah, I think it's easier to just do something on an acoustic.
Yeah. Which model would it be?
I don't know. I don't really.
You don't worry about that.
I don't worry.
Okay.
I don't know much about guitars except just play them.
Well, it's been a pleasure. So we're going to right towards the end of our conversations about Breen and his music and his literature and his luxury item, heading off to the desert island. But one of the twists, of course, which I forgot to introduce at the premise, at the beginning of the show, talking about the premise, is that you are only allowed, in fact, to choose one song to take with you. So you have to choose from those four. You choose one. And so I hate to put you on the spot because I've just created what's called some dead air, I imagine. But
I think okay, so I'll go for Guy Clark because his song that he wrote for that friend of his can then connect you to the friends that you have, and you can listen to him express how much you cared about somebody, and that'll connect you to the people that you care about that are not on the island with you.
Yeah. How do you think you'd do on a desert island, Breen?
Oh,
with your guitar and your book and your song?
I don't know. I don't want to get sunburnt.
So typically in this show on the desert island discs, the host, who in this case is me, offers an additional piece of literature so that you don't get too bored. So you take your book. In the show, it's the Bible, but I've chosen not to do that in the spirit of being inclusive.
Right.
And I'll offer you an ISB yearbook instead. How does that sound? So you look at pictures of all your favourite students.
All right. Do I get to pick
and
the
all
year?
your colleagues. Yes, you get to pick the year. Breen, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed it. And hopefully, as I said at the beginning, both our listeners will have enjoyed it too.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to do this.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
Can you dig it? Can you dig it? Can you dig it?
You're listening to DJ Teach on Futures Public Radio.